Ben, hello. Thank you for coming.
Glad to be here.
Absolutely. Can you please first introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah, my name is Ben Bayer. I'm a senior fellow at the Ayn Rand Institute in the United States, and I'm here at American University to give a talk about the moral foundations of capitalism.
Interesting. As far as I understand, you are a professor at the Ayn Rand Institute.
Yes.
Can you please say what is Ayn Rand's philosophy to the people who may not know anything about it, who may first heard for the first time about it?
Yeah, well, first, just to familiarize you with who Ayn Rand was, she's Russian-born, traveled to America 100 years ago this month in 1926, where she became an author, novelist, philosopher, and her philosophy is expressed, I think, most eloquently in her novels. Most famously, she wrote The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. It was 1943 and 1957. Her philosophy is the idea that reason, individualism, and capitalism are central to her philosophy, and she celebrates and defends these.
I'm currently reading Fountainhead.
Yes.
And I'm interested, what do you like, which book do you like more? Maybe it's a bit harder to say, but Fountainhead or Atlas Shrugged?
Well, The Fountainhead is the one I read first, so it will always have a special place in my heart for that reason. It was the book that won me over to Ayn Rand's philosophy, and there's a lot of respects in which it's highly personal and very emotional.
I first heard about Ayn Rand last semester. That's when I started reading her and understanding about objectivism and capitalism being the moral foundation, economic freedom. And then I recommended this book to my father, and he's currently reading Fountainhead as well. And he's absolutely fascinated as I am. And I was curious, when was the last time you first heard about Ayn Rand or about one of her books? What was your path to understanding Ayn Rand and to...
Right. So I was in high school, so I was around 17, and at the time, I had opposite beliefs on just about every subject from what I currently do.
Interesting.
So I was left-wing politically and religious, and when I read The Fountainhead, it changed my mind about all those issues, or at least it began the process of changing my mind on all those kinds of issues. It was I was at the time I was involved in interscholastic debate. We debated about philosophical questions. I had read some of Ayn Rand's nonfiction philosophy, where she analyzes the importance of philosophy in everyday life. I didn't yet know what her philosophy was, but I knew that she was a philosopher. And so that led me to pick up the novel. I wanted to learn more about what her philosophy was, and that was a life-changing experience for me.
Can you summarize, I know it's going to be extremely hard and probably bastardizing to her philosophy. Can you summarize it in like 2 sentences, let's say, 2-3 sentences?
Just what the philosophy is?
Summarize, yes.
So her view is that reason is our only way of knowing the world. It's also our basic tool of survival. Our own life is our highest moral purpose, our own life and our happiness. It's right to pursue your happiness. It's wrong to sacrifice it. And what that means politically, the system that is built and designed to protect and enable each of us to pursue our own lives and happiness is the system of laissez-faire capitalism, which is where the government is devoted entirely to the protection of individual rights.
Laissez-faire capitalism was under attack in the last years, in the last decades, I would say. It is highly criticized, and you know the critics. How do you respond to the main critics that it's selfish? I think the criticism of selfishness is applicable to all the Ayn Rand's philosophy from its critics. How do you answer specifically to laissez-faire capitalism?
Sure. Well, I mean, one thing to note in passing is that she wrote a book called The Virtue of Selfishness. And so there's a way in which the response to that criticism you just mentioned is guilty as charged. capitalism is the system that, I mean, the way I put it before was it defends each individual's right to pursue his own happiness. But that's all that selfishness really is if you understand the concept clearly. The way that it's often packaged, the way that the critics will sell it, and we'll be talking about this a little bit in my presentation today, is if you're selfish, what that means is you're pursuing your own happiness, but at the expense of other people, exploiting them, preying on them, pillaging and plundering. Ayn Rand's view is that that is a smear of what true selfishness is, that someone who's truly devoted and committed to pursuing his own self-interest is someone who wants to live by and for himself. Emphasis there on by himself, that if you're sacrificing others, if you're exploiting or preying on others, then you're not the one who's actually in charge of your life. You're depending on them. You're depending on the things that they produce. You're hoping that they'll do the work of living for you. But someone who's truly selfish wants to do the work of living for his own sake and on his own, because that's what human life really consists in. That, the essence of human life is productive work. It's using your mind to identify and create values in the world. And half of the benefit to you is the actual process of the work. Someone who is honest and rational enjoys work and enjoys seeing the fruits that they can create through their work.
One of the works of Ayn Rand that fascinated and influenced me the most was Philosophy and Who Needs It. Can you please summarize and say to our audience why philosophy matters? Because I think we have a lack in our society of understanding the importance of philosophy.
As I should mention, reading her title essay in that book by the same title, Philosophy Who Needs It, that was the very first thing I ever read of Ayn Rand's. The book I mentioned I picked up when I was in debate, and it was the one that made me think, I don't even know what her philosophy is, but I can see why she thinks philosophy is so important, and it got me interested in philosophy more generally.
Yes.
Her argument is that everyone needs philosophy in the sense of everyone needs to think about their philosophical ideas. Doesn't mean everybody needs to become a philosopher, but everyone.
What is a philosopher?
Well, a philosopher is someone who specializes and writes and thinks and talks and teaches about philosophy, which is, I guess, what I do. But
you consider yourself a philosopher?
I'm a philosophy teacher at the very least. I certainly haven't originated my own philosophic system, which sometimes is what that connotes. But everyone, nonetheless, regardless of their profession, has philosophical viewpoints. Everyone has a certain basic view of reality, of what's possible in it for them. Everyone has some kind of basic value standards. But the fact that everyone has those views by no means guarantees that they've thought them through consciously, intentionally, that they haven't. It doesn't imply that they've scrutinized their views. Very often people get their basic view of life and reality by passively absorbing it from other people. And the danger there, the jeopardy that you're in when you live in a society and you absorb ideas from other people is that you haven't scrutinized them, that you don't realize there might be contradictions in the basic principles that you accept. And so while it's the case that everyone has a philosophy, not everybody does enough to scrutinize those views. And Ayn Rand's idea is you don't have a choice about whether you have a philosophy. Your only choice is whether you're going to scrutinize it, whether you're going to think about it, whether you're going to have a rational philosophy or not. And she thought that everyone needs to have a rational philosophy so that they know what's guiding their life, as opposed to, and so that they know that their life is headed in a positive direction, as opposed to having absorbed a bunch of ideas they haven't scrutinized, where they're at the mercy of other people's ideas they haven't necessarily evaluated, ideas they don't necessarily know are actually good. And so she thinks everyone on some level needs to scrutinize their basic view of life if they want to actually push their life in a positive direction.
I'm doing this interview from a perspective of a person who started on a path of understanding Ayn Rand, understanding objectivism. And while I was doing this, a few questions popped up in my head naturally. What is the connection between libertarianism and objectivism? Because I don't think, for me personally, the distinction is really clear.
Sure. Yeah, this is a question people often ask. And the reason that they ask it is that at least from the way people talk about the political idea of libertarianism in the West, there's at least some similarities between it and Ayn Rand's political theory, her advocacy of laissez-faire capitalism. At the same time, she very often pushed back against the idea that she was a libertarian, that her view was a form of libertarianism. And the reason for that is basically that at least the way the political movement that's called libertarianism developed in the 20th century, it did it in a way where it took some ideas that sound like objectivist ideas, the idea that we should ban the initiation of force, that people should be free from force. It took those ideas, but it took them out of context of the philosophic system that Ayn Rand supplied to validate those ideas. And so as a consequence, if you don't, and this connects to the philosophy who needs it point, right? Because if you don't know where your ideas are coming from, if you don't know what validates them, you won't know what they mean, you won't know how to use them, you won't know how to use them to guide your political decision-making, for example. And so libertarians will say, we shouldn't initiate force. Okay, but well, what counts as initiating force? It's pretty clear if I punch you in the face,
yes.
that's initiating force. But what about taking your property? Well, most of them would say I shouldn't take your wallet. Okay, but what about sneaking into your apartment when you're not there? Is that your property? What makes it yours? Once you go into anything more sophisticated than don't punch someone in the nose, it's now an increasingly complex philosophic question. What is yours? What action against various objects counts as force against you? For that, you need a philosophic system. You need a philosophic way of understanding what force is, and what it means to then banish it from society. And that is her position, that government should banish force from society. And in good part because libertarians don't have a clear understanding of what force is, why it's bad, what we should do about it. Many of them say, oh, the solution must be we should be anarchists and there should be no government. But, and not all of them say that, but many of them, a surprising number of them do. And her view is anarchism is certainly not what she advocates. She thinks it's actually a form of legitimizing the use of force because it means now everyone has to govern their own decisions about the use of force. Everyone needs to gather into different self-protection societies, aka gangs. And she thinks that in a proper society that banishes the use of force, government has a monopoly on the use of force for the sake of using it in retaliation against criminals and aggressors. And it puts it under objective control so that nobody menaces anyone else with their kind of anarchistic, irrational use of force.
What is an ideal government for you?
Well, in this perspective, it's one that restricts its function entirely to protection of individual rights. So it's not one that says, let's play around with the economy in order to create more GDP or achieve the common good. No, it's devoted entirely to the protection of individual rights. Government is force. It is the monopoly on force. And the only question is, what's that monopoly going to be used for? And Ayn Rand's view is if it's not being used exclusively in retaliation to protect people's rights, then government has the potential to be the aggressor, to be initiating force against someone. So, and one of the things I'll talk about in the lecture today is that anytime you have some form of statism, where you think that the purpose of government is not just to protect rights, but to achieve XYZ social goal, then if it's regulating, if it's redistributing, if it's manipulating the money supply in one form or another, it's then actually initiating force against someone, against innocent victims. And that is a perversion of its purpose. Its purpose should be strictly limited to the protection of individual rights.
In your ideal, in your utopian government, which departments there are? Department of Justice?
Oh, I don't know if it matters how many departments there are or what you call them, but the basic functions should be the basic three she always mentioned were the police, the courts and the military, the police to protect the rights against domestic aggressors, criminals, the military to protect us against foreign aggressors, and the courts to interpret the laws so that if there are disputes between people where it's unclear whose rights are in violation, there's a mediator to settle those disputes.
Mm-hmm. Well, criticism may be, well, how about healthcare? How about the people who cannot provide for themselves? Maybe not because they're lazy, but because of bad luck.
Sure. I mean, you can ask that question about all kinds of goods and services besides healthcare.
Yes,
what about
sure.
food? What about shelter?
Yep.
There's all kinds of things we need to live, all kinds of material resources
Mm-hmm.
and goods and services that we need to live. And there's always a possibility that someone can have bad luck that deprives them of any of the above,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's healthcare or food or anything. And I mean, Ayn Rand's view is that it's each of our responsibilities to live our own lives, that our primary obligation is to live our own life, to live by our own effort and mind, to provide ourselves with these necessities and anything else we want in life. It's no one's obligation to live another person's life for them, to provide healthcare, foods, school, education, housing, whatever you want. Now, it's true that sometimes that people have bad luck, they suffer misfortune, and there's two things to say about that. One is that it's what I've already said, which is that when someone suffers misfortune, it is fundamentally their problem. The fact that you suffer misfortune is not an obligation on me. I mean, there's a lot of misfortune in the world. No one can hope to be able to cover all the misfortune that there is through their own efforts. You'd spend your whole life running around looking for fires to put out. And it's my life. It's to live. It's not yours. At the same time, it's still the case that when you live in a society, if it's a free society, if it's a society where each of us are free to make decisions about how to use our own resources, it's pretty rare that individuals have no social relationships that they can use in such kinds of emergencies. We have friends, we have family. If we're in trouble truly through no fault of our own, if there are other people in our lives who value us in the same way that we value them, if we have a trading relationship, they will have good reason and even good selfish reason to want to help us out. Whether family or friends, there could even be private charities. In the 19th century in the United States, there were a whole series of what they called mutual aid societies, where if you're a worker, for example, you join one of these societies, you pay a small fee every month for a kind of social insurance where, let's say, you lose your job, you're down on your luck, you cash in now on the policy that you've made. You're able to get aid to support yourself if you're out of work, et cetera. That can function in effect as a kind of business, and that's not even charity. But of course, there could also conceivably be charities where people, because they know certain people are in trouble through no fault of their own, they want to help for good reason. They see that as helping. They see that as helping people who are in trouble through no fault of their own, because it's something that can happen to any of us. But it's important that that kind of charity, when it's done properly, is not a sacrifice, that it's not something that the people providing it are doing because it's their moral duty. They don't have a right to live if they don't help anyone else. No, it's something that you would do it best when you can afford it, when you have a lot to spare. It's no trouble to you to help. And I think there would be plenty of things like that in a free society if people were actually free to create surpluses and then dispose of them at their will. But the trouble with our current society is that they're not. And that deprives a lot of people of the opportunity to engage in that kind of work.
Mm-hmm. Correct me if I'm wrong, but what you're saying is fundamentally that people should have the freedom to act according to their self-interest, in this regard, it's benevolent self-interest, instead of altruism.
Yes, there's definitely an important and major distinction between those two ideas. Benevolence is simply wanting to see other people prosper, especially if they're people who matter to you. Altruism is the idea that's the opposite of rational self-interest, the idea that we shouldn't pursue exclusively our own self-interest, that we should sacrifice our own welfare for the sake of others in need, and one should not be charitable out of altruistic reasons. That's Ayn Rand's view. You should never think that another person's life is more important than your own. What would the possible reason for that even be is the idea that if there's a meal that I could eat, it's okay if it's digested in someone else's stomach, but not in mine. What makes the difference?
This is a Christian idea in core, right? A Christian?
Altruism, absolutely, yeah. It comes historically, for the most part, from Christianity, which means it's a religious idea. And that is a clue to the way Ayn Rand would evaluate it, because the first thing I mentioned when you asked me what is her view is reasons are only means of knowledge, which means not faith. And there is, in fact, no rational reason that's ever been offered by any philosopher I've ever studied for why it's not your own life that's your highest moral purpose, but sacrificing it for another person. What would the reason possibly be? The only reasons that have ever been offered are otherworldly reasons. God tells you that you ought to do it, but if there's no evidence for that, there's no reason for it.
I know many people nowadays in Bulgaria whom I speak with that are not religious per se, but they argue the point that religion, and specifically a Christian religion, has a net benefit to society by offering superior values, by making basically good people in a good society. How do you respond to that?
It's a very common argument, and there's two things to say. Well, one is that what we've already talked about, which is that to the extent that religion has any significant influence on people's morality, the morality that it preaches is altruistic self-sacrifice. And I don't think that's actually a good a benefit for anyone in society. I think that it's a detriment, if anything, for reasons we talked about already. But the other point is that part of what's usually motivating that kind of point is the idea, if there's no God or there's no religion to speak of, there's no way that we can acquire moral guidance. The idea is it's only through religion, only through belief in God that we can validate any kind of moral guidance. And I think that's just false. I think, in particular, if you look at Ayn Rand's own arguments, there are rational arguments for morality, particularly and especially when you consider it from the perspective of rational self-interest. There's every reason in the world why there are certain paths in life that are better and other paths in life that are worse. We're living creatures. Living creatures survive only by pursuing a definite path, only by achieving certain kinds of goals and objectives and values. If we eat the food, we live. If we eat the poison, we die. And morality, ethics, is just the broadest possible conception of the difference between food and poison. There's not just food versus poison for the body. There's food and poison for the soul. Food and poison for our character. There are basic values and virtues that conduce to our living a happy, flourishing life, and there are vices that subtract from it, that destroy it.
I don't really understand how can you distinguish between good or bad, between good and evil, without the, let's say, help of God, without faith. How do you distinguish?
Well, you use the same basic means that you would use to tell the difference between food and poison. You use you use sensory observations. You use scientific knowledge of the world. It's ultimately an issue of biology. Biology and all the derivative fields that are based on that, psychology, economics, etc. All of these are concerned with studying human life and what promotes human life or destroys it. And so we can, in Ayn Rand's view, the basic thing that human beings need to live is not just food. It's we need knowledge. We need to use our rationality to acquire the knowledge of how to get food, of how to build shelter, of how to create industrial civilization and a government that protects our rights. All of that is about acquiring knowledge. And there are basic principles that help us understand what is it to protect our rational mind in its pursuit of knowledge, and what are principles that undercut our ability to know the things that we need to know in order to live.
Some of the criticism about objectivism and libertarianism, and I'm tying those two together, although they're not together, just for the sake of the question,
Sure.
is that they presuppose an ideal society. It's a utopia. It's non-achievable in the real world ever. What's your response to that?
Well, one question would be, why think that? So what's true is that any ideal is difficult to achieve. If it's really an ideal, if you're saying this is the best possible that we want to go after in some domain, then everything good is difficult as it is rare. And so it's true that once you define an ideal, you're only going to find rare occasions where people succeed in achieving it, practicing it effectively. That's true for anything good in life. And so it's true, for example, that the ideal of capitalism, complete separation of state and economics, is something that's never been fully, entirely achieved in any particular country in all of history. Ayn Rand called capitalism the unknown ideal. And part of the reason that she called it that is because even to know what the ideal is, what it means, is something that people don't fully appreciate. And of course, if you don't know or understand the ideal that you're striving for, that's going to make it hard to achieve. And so part of what she saw her mission as a philosopher is to actually explain and help people understand what these ideals are so that they can achieve it. Though it's also true that even though we've never had a fully laissez-faire capitalist society, she does think, and I think, we got the closest we ever got in the late 19th century in the United States, after the Civil War, after slavery was abolished, before the progressive movement started implementing various kinds of statist legislation, antitrust, et cetera. So there's a brief period of 20, 30 years there where we're the closest we ever got, where government was most focused exclusively on protecting everyone's individual rights. And the thing that you observe from that period in history and from many other periods in history is that to the extent that we've gotten closer to the ideal, you've also seen incredible results. You've seen standards of living skyrocket. You've seen people lifted out of poverty, not just in the United States, but wherever the same experiment has been tried around the world. And you look, for example, at what's happened in East Asia just in the last 30, 40 years. You look at the comparison between North Korea, between South Korea, between China and Taiwan, in each of those pairs where you have more government respect for and protection of freedom, you have even greater results. You have even greater prosperity. And so while it's true that we've never succeeded in fully implementing that ideal, the closer we get to it each time, the better we do, which just raises the question, well, why stop? Why not go for it completely? And there are reasons historically why we haven't, but usually they come from the fact that people don't understand what their ideal is. They don't know why they should achieve the ideal. And that's why philosophy is so important, to help people understand those ideals so that they can fully achieve them.
You mentioned a few minutes ago about the progressive movements that started in the 2000s, I think. We can say that. And specific.
I was talking about the 19th century progressive movement.
Oh.
Yes.
I want to talk about the nowadays progressive movement. What's your take on that? Which is a pretty broad term. Let's focus more on the West, and specifically on America. And I will even narrow my question down to, how do you rate the left and the progressive, the far left and the progressive movement nowadays in America, specifically in the West?
Right. So one place, one respect in which you see this movement having an impact, especially in the United States, is you see it in the form of people like Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, where socialism is now in the mix explicitly in American politics in a way it hasn't been in 100 years plus, where you have politicians very high up in power, openly calling themselves socialists. You also see this, the newly elected mayor of New York, Mamdani.
Yes.
That's new in America, or relatively new, and so it's coming out of the activism on the left, which you might call progressive. I put that in quotes because I don't think it's actually a form of progress. And where it's coming from ultimately, I think, is the fact that on the left, the guiding principle for decades, and even before they started calling themselves socialistic, the guiding principle has been egalitarianism, the idea that there's something wicked, disordered, evil about the existence of inequalities in society. And that, when I talk about inequality, the kind of inequality that they're concerned about, I'm talking about socioeconomic inequality, inequality in ability, inequality in intelligence, inequality in advantage in life. The way that they try to sell people on this idea is by packaging the kind of equality they want to achieve, where you eliminate all those differences, with equality of rights. Now, equality of rights is a proper, valid political principle. As I've been stressing, the purpose of government is to protect everyone's individual rights, regardless of who you are, where you're from. That's what it means to have a just society. But they equivocate, they equate, they conflate equality of rights with equality of outcomes, equality of abilities, et cetera. And they say if you want one, you should have the other, but they're not the same. Anytime you argue that government should use force to eliminate inequalities of status, wealth, et cetera, what you're doing is you're using force to redistribute someone's resources to someone else. And at the end of the day, what really motivates it is not the idea that we can pull everybody up to the same level, because historically, economically, you know that when you do those kinds of redistribution schemes, it actually hurts everyone. And so
you're dragging down.
Yeah. So what egalitarians are really concerned with is not lifting everybody up, it's with dragging someone down. They see somebody has achieved something more than they have, they want to knock them down. They want to, it's very nihilistic. And so they claim to be motivated by great positive ideals. I don't think they actually are. I think they're motivated by a kind of hatred of ability, a hatred of success. And I mean, in fact, you cannot, just factually, you cannot eliminate the fact that some people are going to have greater advantages, be born into more fortunate circumstances than others. That's just a fact of life. You can't eliminate that fact. You can only try to hurt the people who it applies to. So it amounts to, at the end of the day, a kind of rebellion, not just against freedom, but against reality. They think that if they tear someone down, they wipe away the fact of those different abilities. But you don't wipe away that fact. You only hurt people.
I want to go back to the question about the progressive movement nowadays. One of my friends who used to be a professor at this university made this experiment, which basically we can summarize that. Please raise your hand who is pro-communism and who is against communism amongst the students in the class. It was much complicated than that, but in simple terms. And interestingly enough, Americans were pro-communism, pro-socialism, and Bulgarians who actually, whose parents actually experienced the evils and the destructive force of communism said, of course not.
Yeah.
Of course not. And I actually heard this point before, and it's quite interesting, is that back in the days, you can tell who is rich, who is poor, and nowadays you can't really do it, let's say, by the looks of a person.
No, it's hard to do.
Yeah, and nowadays what they do to differentiate is to develop those good ideas, right? Ideas good
luxury beliefs.
Exactly. And it's interesting. I'll have an interesting question. What is the idea you would defend no matter what? The idea you stand behind no matter what, even if the whole world is against you.
I would have to say that reason is an absolute. That my only way of knowing the world is through my senses and through my mind, and that's the reason I would defend no matter what, because that's the thing that you have to hold as true to hold anything else as true. It's your basic methodological compass, that you believe only what you have good reason for, only what you have evidence for. You don't hold it on faith. You don't just go the way on the basis of your feelings. And that's the lens through which any other view about morality or politics or economics has to be approached.
What if a person would like to familiarize himself or herself with Ayn Rand? Where should they start? From which book or which essay?
I mean, I always say start with the fiction. If it depends a lot on who they are, what time they have. If you want something that's short and you don't have a lot of time, try Anthem. You read it in an hour or two. It gives you a really crystallized, condensed portrayal of the conflict between individualism and collectivism.
It's pretty straightforward.
Yes. And it's set in a dystopian future, highly allegorical. It's good even if you're in middle school, high school. Other than that, I'd say The Fountainhead or Atlas Shrugged. If you want the more sophisticated, more literarily integrated masterpiece magnum opus, Atlas. If you're not quite ready for that, maybe try The Fountainhead.
And outside of what Ayn Rand has written, what book would you recommend? Like a few books. Let's say top 3 books everyone should read outside, of course, of Ayn Rand's work.
Well, the major one, of course, is Leonard Peikoff's book, Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand. So in her lifetime, Ayn Rand never wrote a kind of systematic treatise elaborating on her entire philosophy and how all the different pieces fit together. However, Leonard Peikoff gave lectures doing that, putting all the pieces together.
Series of lectures.
While she was alive, she approved that lecture course, and that lecture course then became the basis for his book, which was published in 1991. And it's kind of a textbook on objectivism, and you see how what all the basic principles are by branch of philosophy: metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, politics, etc. So that's a definite recommendation.
That's the first one.
And if you're going for nonfiction, not written by Ayn Rand, that's definitely the first one. I had the experience of being able to read that very soon in my exploration of objectivism, which was a real privilege because for many decades, people who wanted to study for philosophy had no such book, and I got to get it right from the beginning.